Okay, intrusive thoughts about family and people we care about. I'll walk you through the 4 steps explaining how I would approach recovery around this. The first thing I'll do, I want to look more broadly than just a specific fear. I start by looking at context and consequences. Context is about the uncertainties and systems affecting us, currently and in the past. Intrusive thoughts about family distress us because they threaten things we care about. When I look at context, I'm curious about what's happening in other areas of life around things I care about. Also, I'm going to look at the consequences. What consequences am I afraid of if this fear came true? What would the fear lead to? What would I lose? With this fear, the consequences tend to fit into a few buckets. The first bucket is feelings. I couldn't handle the feelings like guilt and shame and regret if I did such terrible things. The second bucket, losing relationships. Even having the thoughts makes my relationships feel contaminated and wrong. And the third bucket, I'll lose my identity. The thoughts are the opposite of me. I don't want people to know I have these thoughts because of what they'll think and even what I'll think about myself. I'm then going to pick the consequence that I'm most afraid of and that I recognize I actually try to control throughout my life. The other ways I try to control that feared consequence may seem totally normal. Let's say the major feared consequence is that identity fear, the fear of not being ourselves and not being seen as ourselves. I then look at everything I do throughout life to control uncertainty around identity, trying to prove who I am to others, checking that my actions align perfectly with my values, attaching meaning to things I buy, seeking reassurance that I'm a good person, avoiding situations where I might be misunderstood, avoiding anything related to somebody I judge as bad, researching the subconscious, analyzing my past for evidence of who I really am, and so on. It's through those practices I see as normal that I teach my brain to fear losing control of my identity because I've so consistently attached my identity to external things and viewed it as something that depends on controlling the minds of other people. In the second step, we shift the focus to what we care about. I'm going to narrow in on what I value because the feared consequence of having these thoughts is that I'll lose control of my identity. I can see that I care about being myself in the world. If, as a reaction to these thoughts, I've been avoiding family or other people I care about, if I've avoided things like using kitchen knives, or I haven't been driving family members because I'm afraid of causing harm, or I'm limiting communication because I want to first get certainty about who I am, if I've been avoiding responsibility, avoiding goals and success, because I'm afraid of people finding out about my thoughts and losing everything, if I've been constantly checking for reassurance instead of living my life, then I've actually been creating the very thing I'm most afraid of. I want to be myself, but I'm instead handing over control of my life and my identity to random brain indigestion popping up in that squishy urge blob inside my skull. So the valued actions I'm going to choose are about reversing that. In this case, I'm going to increase time and energy spent on doing actions I want to do in the world, while decreasing time and energy spent on the fears around not being myself. For the third step, I'll set up a series of exercises over several weeks to practice growing those valued actions while allowing the uncertainties and whatever brain stuff to be there. I want to spend more energy on actions that practice being me. What will happen when I do that is the brain will throw up more uncertainties and intrusive thoughts. I'm not going to do the old habits trying to get certainty and control. Instead, I'll focus on what I want to give to the world. So here's an example of a first month's workout plan. Week 1, each day I communicate with one new person. I don't try to control what they think about me. Maybe I'll ask a question to a clerk in a store or reach out to somebody online. I don't wait for right thoughts or review what I'm going to say. Maybe they'll think I'm annoying or I said something stupid. I stop all checking for reassurance online about harm thoughts or if I'm a good person. When the urge comes up to go online and check for reassurance if I'm a horrible person, I instead recognize it's actually about my desire to be myself. So I go and do actions that reflect what I care about and what I want to do in the world. Week 2. Continue the practices from the previous week, and I organize events and communicate with family on a schedule I set. I set the days and times to communicate in advance, so I'm not asking a feeling for permission to be myself in the world. And a key support here is not checking for reassurance from family when I'm spending time with them. Instead of trying to get something from them, what do I want to give to the people I care about? Week 3, I continue with the practices from the previous weeks, and I watch some TV shows with scary topics or read the news without trying to avoid any topics. This is a chance to practice trust in myself and recognize that I'm in charge of my choices and being myself in the world. I can experience something on TV just like I can experience something in my head, and I continue being myself in the world. Week 4, continue with the practices from the previous weeks, and I'm going to practice an action I've been avoiding around loved ones, and I do that action in a way that supports them. Maybe I've been avoiding using knives or not driving family members because I didn't want to have intrusive thoughts while doing those things. So maybe I cook a loved one a meal or drive them somewhere. The thoughts can come along for the ride. The thoughts can join us to have a meal together. The 4th step is to sustain and continue growing what I care about. The focus shifts to supports. For example, when we have fears about losing control of our identity, it can help to approach identity like a garden. It's something we grow and cultivate through consistent actions. So what consistent actions will nourish identity in my life? In the past, I conflated my identity with the thoughts and feelings and images and whatever's in my head. That's what's known as cognitive fusion. I believed I was the stuff in my head. So it was very distressing to have thoughts about violent things happening to myself or others. Then I was always doing things to get rid of the thoughts or avoid situations that might trigger them. Then I wasn't living my life. I was just being pushed around by any thought. Nourishing my identity was about doing actions that practiced being myself while having any brain stuff. Recognizing that we're not the stuff in our heads is what's called cognitive diffusion. Whereas before, I avoided people when I was experiencing intrusive thoughts because I was afraid that would affect my personality and I'd feel terrible if people knew the thoughts I was having. When proactively cultivating my identity, it was about doing actions I wanted to do and placing the thoughts on the same level as any other experience in the environment. I was giving myself the trust to be me while having experiences. It's useful to see that our thoughts aren't problems to fix. It makes sense our initial reaction is to try to clean away thoughts. We don't want to lose ourselves. We don't want to lose things we care about. But the way through this is to identify what we care about and give time and energy to those things, like our families, our friends, our communities, our creative adventures, our planet, because that's the practice of being ourselves. Check out more resources on thetoolkitstore.com.